Dog rushes into hospital. When the nurse sees why, she can't hold back tears. The rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the narrow alley behind Seattle Grace Medical Center into a river of murky water. The wind howled, swirling debris through the darkness, its icy breath biting at everything it touched. Amidst the chaos, a lone figure moved cautiously, paws splashing through puddles as he navigated the treacherous path. His golden fur was soaked, clinging to his lean frame, and his body trembled from the cold. Yet his amber eyes remained sharp, scanning the shadows with purpose. Buddy wasn't just any stray dog. He was a survivor, accustomed to the city's harsh streets and indifferent faces. But tonight was different. Tonight something called to him, a faint, fragile sound carried by the wind. His ears perked up, straining to catch the noise again. It was a cry, barely audible above the rain's roar, but unmistakable in its urgency. A whimper, soft and broken, like the call of a wounded bird. Driven by instinct, Buddy followed the sound, his paws splashing through the freezing water as he wove between dumpsters and discarded cardboard boxes. The scent of rot and rain hung heavy in the air, but beneath it was something else, something raw and vulnerable. As he turned the corner, Buddy stopped abruptly, his body tensing as his eyes locked onto a small bundle lying motionless against the wall. It was a crumpled mass of fabric, soaked and stained, half buried beneath scraps of newspaper. Buddy approached cautiously, his nose twitching as he took in the scent. It was human, delicate and new. His heart raced as he nudged the bundle with his snout, his wet nose brushing against the damp cloth. The bundle shifted, and a tiny, feeble cry escaped from within. Buddy jumped back, startled, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. He sniffed again, more urgently this time, his body trembling from both the cold and the realization of what he had found. A baby, a newborn, tiny and helpless, abandoned in the dark. Buddy's eyes widened, his heart pounding as he understood the gravity of the situation. The infant's face was pale, lips tinged blue from the cold, and its tiny fist clenched as it fought to cry out again. The rain poured mercilessly, each drop stealing warmth from the fragile body. Buddy let out a soft whine, his instincts screaming at him to help. But how? He was just a stray, powerless against the world of humans. Yet as he looked at the baby, something stirred deep within him, a memory of warmth and safety, of gentle hands and soft voices from a life he could barely remember. It was enough. Determination flashed in his amber eyes as he carefully took hold of the fabric with his teeth, gripping it as gently as he could. The bundle was light, far too light, and Buddy could feel the baby's frail body shivering through the wet cloth. He turned back toward the street, his paws slipping on the rain-slicked pavement as he hurried to the only place he knew could save the child: the hospital. Seattle Grace Medical Center loomed in the distance, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Buddy's muscles burned as he ran, his breath visible in the cold air. He dodged puddles and debris, his focus unwavering despite the wind's furious howl. The bundle swung with his movements, the baby's faint cries urging him forward. As he approached the hospital entrance, Buddy's pace slowed. The automatic glass doors stood before him, closed and impassable. He placed the bundle down carefully, his eyes never leaving it as he pawed at the door, scratching and whining in desperation. The doors remained still, mocking his efforts with their cold, indifferent glass. Buddy barked, a sharp, pleading sound that echoed through the storm. Inside, the waiting room was crowded with weary faces, patients clutching their pain and fatigue as they waited for relief. Nurse Sarah Thompson moved briskly through the hallway, her arms full of charts as she fought the exhaustion threatening to drag her down. It had been a long shift, and the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. As she passed by the entrance, a sound caught her attention. A bark, raw and desperate, cutting through the hum of hospital machinery. Sarah paused, her eyes flicking to the glass doors, where a drenched dog stood, golden fur plastered to its thin frame. Its eyes were wild, locked on something on the ground beside it. At first, she thought it was a stray seeking shelter from the storm, but something about the dog's urgency made her take a closer look. The animal paced frantically, its nose nudging at a small, crumpled bundle lying motionless on the wet pavement. Sarah's heart stopped as realization hit her like a tidal wave. It couldn't be. She dropped the charts, the papers scattering across the floor as she ran to the door, her fingers trembling as she pressed the button to open it. The cold wind rushed in, swirling rain around her as she stepped outside. The dog didn't run. It stayed by the bundle, its body blocking the rain as much as it could, its eyes never leaving her face. Sarah knelt, her hands shaking as she pulled back the wet fabric, her breath caught in her throat. A baby, impossibly tiny and pale, its lips blue and its body limp. For a moment, the world around her went silent, the storm's fury fading into nothingness as she stared at the infant's fragile face. Then training took over. Sarah scooped the baby into her arms, feeling the coldness seep into her skin. The child was barely breathing, its chest rising and falling with shallow, ragged gasps. "Dear God," she whispered, cradling the infant against her body as she turned to run inside. "I need help! Code Blue!" Her voice echoed through the hall, sending nurses and doctors into motion. The emergency team sprang to life, the gurney arriving as Sarah laid the baby down, her hands moving instinctively to check vital signs. The dog remained at the doorway, its golden eyes watching her every move, a silent guardian who had refused to abandon its charge. Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she watched the team fight to bring the child back, their voices sharp and urgent as they administered oxygen and warm blankets. She looked back at the dog, its body trembling from cold and fear, yet its gaze never wavered. "You saved her," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she realized the magnitude of what she was witnessing. This stray, this forgotten creature of the streets, had heard a cry in the darkness and answered with courage that defied logic. She stepped toward the door, her eyes locked with the dog's as it backed away, uncertainty flickering in its eyes. "It's okay," Sarah called softly, her hand outstretched. "You did good." The dog hesitated, its body tense and ready to flee, but it didn't run. Instead, it lowered its head, its eyes filled with a sorrow that Sarah couldn't understand. Then, with a final, lingering look at the baby fighting for life inside, the dog turned and disappeared into the storm. Sarah stood there, frozen in place as the rain soaked her to the bone. Her heart ached with a mixture of gratitude and grief, the image of those golden eyes burning into her memory. She knew she would never forget them, nor the courage that had brought a dying child to her door. As the doors closed, sealing her inside the bright, sterile world of the hospital, Sarah made a silent promise to find that dog again, to thank him properly and discover the story behind his amber eyes. The rain had finally eased by dawn, leaving behind puddles that glistened under the pale morning light. Inside Seattle Grace Medical Center, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. The infant, now named Lily by the staff, lay in an incubator, her tiny chest rising and falling in delicate, fragile movements. Wires and tubes connected her to monitors that beeped rhythmically, tracking every heartbeat and breath. Nurse Sarah Thompson stood beside the glass enclosure, her eyes red from a sleepless night but filled with fierce determination. She watched as Dr. Patel gently examined Lily, his experienced hands moving with the utmost care. "Her vitals are stabilizing," he murmured, adjusting the oxygen levels. "She's a fighter." Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. But beneath the exhaustion, questions churned in her mind. Who could abandon a baby like this? And where had that dog come from? The memory of those golden eyes haunted her, the way they had watched her every move with unwavering intensity. She had never seen such sorrow in an animal before, nor such loyalty. As if sensing her thoughts, Dr. Patel glanced at her. "The police want to talk to you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You were the first to see her." Sarah nodded, her gaze never leaving Lily's tiny form. "I'll be right there." She hesitated, reaching into the incubator to brush a finger against Lily's delicate hand. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around hers, a faint whimper escaping her lips. Sarah's heart tightened. "Hang in there, little one. You're safe now." She turned away, forcing herself to leave the room. She needed answers, not just for Lily, but for herself. She needed to understand why this child had been left alone in the cold, and how a stray dog had become her savior. In the waiting area, Detective Mason stood by the vending machine, his tall frame leaning casually as he sipped lukewarm coffee. His sharp blue eyes flicked up as Sarah approached, his face softening with concern. "Nurse Thompson?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Detective Mason. I appreciate you taking the time to talk." Sarah shook his hand, her grip firm despite the fatigue weighing her down. "Anything to help," she replied. "That baby, she's lucky to be alive." Mason's expression darkened. "You found her outside the hospital, right? Can you walk me through what happened?" Sarah took a deep breath, recounting every detail. The rain, the barking, the golden retriever standing guard over a bundle of soaked fabric. She described the dog's desperation, how he had refused to leave until she picked up the baby. "It was like he understood," she murmured, her voice faltering, "like he knew she needed help." Mason's pen hovered over his notepad, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Did the dog have a collar? Any sign that he belonged to someone?" Sarah shook her head. "No collar, no tags. He was just there. And then, as soon as I brought Lily inside, he was gone." Mason scribbled down her words, his jaw tightening. "We're looking into security footage to see if he shows up. Maybe he can lead us to whoever left the baby." He paused, his gaze softening as he studied Sarah's weary face. "You did good finding her when you did. If that dog hadn't been there—" His voice trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, her mind flashing back to Lily's pale face and blue lips. "I need to find him," she whispered, more to herself than to Mason. "That dog, he saved her. He didn't just find her. He saved her." Mason's eyes flickered with curiosity. "You seem pretty sure about that." Sarah met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I've been a nurse for 10 years. I've seen how people react in emergencies. That dog wasn't just scared or curious. He was desperate. He stayed by her side, even when I took her inside. He wanted to make sure she was safe." Mason tapped his pen against the notepad, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Looks like I'm not the only one on this case." Sarah's cheeks flushed, embarrassment creeping in. I want to understand. Why did he care so much? And where did he come from?" Mason pocketed his notepad, his expression thoughtful. "I'll see what I can dig up. In the meantime, get some rest. You look like you've been through hell." Sarah laughed weakly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the night before. "You're not wrong about that." She watched Mason walk away, his figure disappearing around the corner. But even as exhaustion weighed on her, Sarah's mind refused to rest. She found herself retracing her steps, back to the emergency room doors where she had first seen him. The rain had washed away any footprints, leaving no trace of the golden retriever's presence. She stood there, staring at the empty pavement, her heart aching with a strange sense of loss. It was ridiculous, she knew. He was just a dog, a stray who had wandered off as quickly as he had appeared. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. As she turned to head back inside, a flicker of movement caught her eye. In the distance, near the alley where she had found Lily, a golden shape darted behind a dumpster. Sarah's breath hitched, her heart leaping in her chest. "Buddy!" The name slipped out instinctively, a name she hadn't realized she'd given him until that moment. But the figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Sarah stood there, rainwater seeping into her shoes, her eyes straining to see through the gloom. She took a step forward, her pulse quickening, but then hesitated. What was she doing? Chasing after a stray dog in the rain? She shook her head, chastising herself as she walked back into the warmth of the hospital. But as the glass doors slid shut behind her, Sarah couldn't shake the image of those golden eyes. They haunted her, echoing with a sorrow she couldn't understand. She glanced back one last time, her chest tightening with an inexplicable sense of longing. "I'll find you," she whispered, her fingers brushing the door's cold surface. "I promise." And as she walked away, the rain began to fall once more, washing away the last traces of paw prints that led into the darkness. The following days at Seattle Grace Medical Center were a blur of tests, consultations, and whispered prayers. Lily's condition remained delicate, her tiny body fighting to recover from the cold that had nearly claimed her life. Nurse Sarah Thompson was rarely seen far from the infant's side, her presence a constant source of comfort and vigilance. Every beep of the monitor made Sarah's heart skip, but with each passing hour, Lily grew stronger. The baby's color slowly returned, a soft pink replacing the ghostly pallor that had haunted Sarah's nightmares. Yet even as relief settled in, questions continued to gnaw at her. Who had left this precious child out in the rain? And where was Buddy, the golden-eyed hero who had brought her to safety? On her lunch break, Sarah found herself standing once again by the emergency room doors, her eyes scanning the parking lot and the shadowed alley beyond. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shimmering under the morning sun. But there was no sign of the golden retriever. Sarah's chest tightened with disappointment. She had hoped he would come back, if only for a moment, just to see Lily was safe. She sighed, pressing her hand against the glass. "Where are you, Buddy?" she murmured. Behind her, a voice cut through her thoughts. "Still thinking about that dog?" Detective Mason's deep voice carried a note of curiosity. Sarah turned, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Yeah, I just can't get him out of my head. He saved her life. And then he vanished, just like that." Mason's expression softened, his arms crossing as he leaned against the wall. "I checked the security footage. He showed up out of nowhere, carrying that baby like she was his own. Stayed by the door the whole time, pacing like he knew what was at stake." His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "That's no ordinary stray." Sarah's heart skipped at his words. "Did you see where he went?" Mason shook his head, frustration flickering across his face. "He slipped out of view as soon as you took Lily inside. We followed the cameras down the block, but he disappeared into the alley. Like he was a ghost or something." Sarah's shoulders sagged. "I was afraid of that." Mason's gaze lingered on her, his curiosity deepening. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Sarah hesitated, struggling to find the right words. How could she explain the way Buddy's eyes had looked at her, so full of sorrow and understanding? Or the way he had refused to leave until he was sure Lily was safe? "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel like he was meant to find her, like he was protecting her." Mason's expression softened, his head tilting as he studied her. "You think he knew the mother?" Sarah's breath caught at the possibility. "Maybe, or maybe he was abandoned too, just like Lily." Her voice wavered, emotion tightening her throat. "Maybe that's why he couldn't leave her behind." Mason was silent for a long moment, his eyes drifting to the alley beyond the glass doors. "If that's true, then he's out there alone. No collar, no home, nothing." His jaw tightened, resolve hardening in his gaze. "I'll keep looking. If he's out there, we'll find him." Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you." Mason's lips curved into a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got to figure out who left that baby to die." His voice grew colder, his eyes darkening. "And when I find them, they're going to answer for it." Sarah shivered, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. She looked back at the alley, shadows pooling beneath the dumpsters and broken fences. What kind of person could abandon a newborn? And why? The question circled relentlessly, feeding her restless thoughts. She was still standing there, lost in her worry, when a faint sound reached her ears. A soft whimper, barely audible above the hum of the hospital. Her heart skipped, her eyes widening as she turned towards the alley. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mason's body tensed, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low and firm. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her. He moved swiftly, his footsteps light as he made his way towards the alley. Sarah's pulse raced as she watched him disappear into the shadows. Her fingers tightened around the door handle, her body leaning forward with anticipation. Seconds passed, each one stretching into an eternity. Then she heard Mason's voice, soft and coaxing. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. I won't hurt you." Her heart leapt. "Buddy!" She ran outside before she could stop herself, her shoes slipping on the wet pavement as she reached the mouth of the alley. Mason was crouched low, his hand outstretched towards a golden shape curled beneath a rusted dumpster. Buddy's amber eyes gleamed in the darkness, wide with fear and mistrust. His body was trembling, his fur matted and dirty, his ribs visible beneath his ragged coat. But it was him. Sarah was sure of it. "Buddy," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Buddy's head snapped towards her, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of recognition and relief. He let out a soft whine, his body shifting as if to move towards her. But then he froze, his muscles tensing with hesitation. Sarah's heart ached at the sight of him, so vulnerable and afraid. She sank to her knees, her hand outstretched, just like Mason's. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice soothing and gentle. "You remember me, don't you? I know you're scared, but you don't have to be alone anymore." Buddy's eyes flicked between her and Mason, his body trembling with uncertainty. But then slowly he crawled forward, his belly low to the ground as he approached her. Sarah held her breath, her heart thudding wildly as he sniffed her hand, his nose cold and wet against her skin. Tears filled her eyes as she gently ran her fingers through his tangled fur. "You're a hero, you know that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved her life." Buddy let out a soft huff, his body relaxing as he leaned into her touch. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw his tail wag, just the faintest hint of hope flickering through his golden eyes. But then he pulled back, his body tensing once more as he glanced nervously at Mason. "It's okay," Mason said, his voice gentle. "We're not going to hurt you." He looked at Sarah, his expression softening. "You did it. You found him." Sarah's chest tightened, her hand resting on Buddy's head as she looked into his eyes. "No," she whispered. "He found us." And as she cradled the trembling dog in her arms, Sarah felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a spark of hope igniting amidst the shadows. Buddy stayed close to Sarah's side as they walked back into Seattle Grace Medical Center, his body pressed against her leg as if afraid she might disappear. His golden fur was damp and matted, his ribs too visible beneath the ragged coat. He moved cautiously, each step hesitant, his amber eyes flicking nervously to every sound and movement. But he followed her, his trust fragile yet unbroken. Sarah's heart ached as she watched him, her hand resting gently on his head. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice soft and soothing. "I won't let anything happen to you." Buddy's ears twitched at her words, his gaze lifting to meet hers. For a moment, Sarah saw gratitude flicker in his eyes, a spark of hope fighting to survive beneath layers of fear. Nurse Jenna's eyes widened as Sarah led Buddy into the staff lounge. "Is that?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. "Yeah," Sarah replied, kneeling to check Buddy's paws for cuts. "This is the dog who saved Lily." Jenna's hand flew to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. He's a hero." Sarah's lips curved into a soft smile. "He really is." She moved slowly, keeping her touch gentle as she examined Buddy. His body trembled under her hands, his muscles tense with anxiety, but he didn't pull away. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she murmured, her fingers brushing over a scar hidden beneath his tangled fur. Buddy let out a soft whimper, his head lowering as his eyes grew distant. Jenna crouched beside them, her face softening as she reached out to pet him. "Who would abandon a dog like this?" she whispered. "And Lily? Who could leave a baby out in the cold?" Her voice broke, a tear slipping down her cheek. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, her own heart aching with questions. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." She met Buddy's gaze, her eyes fierce with determination. "We're going to find out together." Buddy's ears perked up, his body leaning into her touch. It was a small gesture, but it filled Sarah's chest with warmth, a spark of trust blooming between them. "Come on, Buddy," she said, her voice gentle. "Let's get you cleaned up." The bathroom was cramped, its walls painted a pale shade of blue that had long since faded. Sarah filled the sink with warm water, the steam curling into the air as she unwrapped a bar of gentle soap. Buddy watched her cautiously, his body pressed against the wall as if afraid to move. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him. "I promise it won't hurt." She dipped a washcloth into the warm water, wringing it out before gently pressing it to Buddy's fur. His body tensed, his eyes widening with fear, but Sarah's voice remained soft and steady. "You're safe. I've got you." Buddy's muscles relaxed, his body sagging as he let her clean the dirt and grime from his golden coat. Sarah worked slowly, her fingers moving carefully over his scars and matted fur. With each stroke, she felt her heart break a little more. Who had hurt him? Who had left him to fend for himself? But she didn't ask those questions aloud. Instead, she whispered words of comfort and encouragement, her voice wrapping around him like a blanket of safety. "You're so brave," she murmured, her fingers combing through his tangled fur. "You saved her, Buddy. You saved Lily." Buddy's eyes softened, his head tilting as he looked up at her. Sarah's breath caught in her throat at the emotion she saw there. Pain, fear, but also hope. "You're not alone anymore," she promised, her voice trembling. "I'm going to take care of you, just like you took care of her." Buddy's nose nudged her hand, his eyes closing as he leaned into her touch. Sarah's heart swelled with affection, a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Instead, she continued to bathe him, her hands gentle and warm. By the time she finished, Buddy's coat gleamed softly, his golden fur clean and soft to the touch. He looked smaller now, more vulnerable, his body frail beneath the layers of fur. Sarah wrapped him in a warm towel, rubbing him dry as he curled into her lap, his body pressing against hers for warmth. "You did so good," she praised, her fingers stroking his ears. "You're such a good boy." Buddy's tail gave the faintest wag, his eyes fluttering as exhaustion pulled him toward sleep. Sarah held him close, her own eyes growing heavy. She could feel his heart beat against her chest, steady and strong, a quiet reminder that they were both still here, still fighting, still surviving. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice a soft lullaby. "You're safe, Buddy." A knock on the door startled them both, Buddy's body tensing as his eyes flew open. Sarah hugged him tighter, her voice low and calming. "It's okay, I'm right here." The door creaked open, Detective Mason stepping inside with a look of relief on his face. "You found him," he said, his eyes softening as he took in the sight of Buddy curled in her arms. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her fingers stroking Buddy's fur. "I couldn't leave him out there. Not after everything he did." Mason's lips curved into a gentle smile. "I didn't think you would." He moved closer, crouching beside them as his eyes grew serious. "I ran the security footage again. This dog, he showed up 2 nights ago. Same alley, same spot. It's like he was waiting for something." Sarah's brows knitted together, her fingers freezing in Buddy's fur. "Waiting for who?" Mason's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "That's the question. Someone was with him? A woman? She left the alley at dawn, but the dog stayed behind." Sarah's heart raced, her mind swirling with possibilities. "Do you think she's Lily's mother?" Mason's eyes flicked to Buddy, his voice low and grave. "I think she might be. And if that's true, then this dog is the only one who knows what really happened." Buddy looked up at Mason, his amber eyes wide and searching. Sarah's breath caught as she realized the truth in Mason's words. Buddy wasn't just a stray, he was a witness, a guardian who had stayed behind to protect a baby who wasn't his own. Her grip tightened around him, her heart breaking for the pain he had seen, the loss he had endured. "Then we need to help him remember," she whispered, her voice fierce with resolve. "We owe him that much." Buddy let out a soft whine, his body curling closer to hers. Sarah held him tightly, her fingers brushing his golden fur as she made a silent promise. "We'll find her, Buddy," she vowed, her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll find her, and we'll make sure no one ever hurts you again." Buddy's amber eyes were wide with fear as he stood in the hospital hallway, his body trembling against Sarah's leg. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glow reflecting off the polished floors. Voices echoed through the corridors, too loud and too unfamiliar, sending Buddy's ears flattening against his skull. His tail tucked between his legs as his gaze darted nervously, his instincts screaming at him to run. But every time his muscles tensed to flee, Sarah's gentle touch on his head pulled him back, grounding him in a safety he was only beginning to understand. "It's okay, Buddy," she whispered, her fingers stroking his fur. "I won't let anything happen to you." Her voice was soft, soothing, a lifeline amidst the chaos. Buddy's body sagged against her, his trust fragile but growing. They moved slowly down the hallway, Sarah guiding Buddy with patient care, her pace matching his hesitant steps. Nurses glanced curiously as they passed, their expressions softening when they recognized him. Whispers followed them, voices filled with awe and gratitude. That's the dog who saved her. He's a hero. Buddy's ears twitched at the sound, his eyes flicking toward the faces watching him. But there was no anger or malice, only kindness and wonder. His body relaxed, his tail giving a tentative wag before tucking back in uncertainty. Sarah's heart swelled as she watched him, pride warming her chest. You're famous, you know that, she teased, her voice light and playful. Everyone here knows what you did. Buddy looked up at her, his golden eyes searching her face as if trying to understand her words. Sarah smiled, her fingers brushing his ear. You're a good boy, Buddy. The bravest boy I've ever met. His tail wagged again, a little stronger this time, his eyes softening at her praise. The moment was beautiful and fragile, a glimpse of hope peeking through the cracks of his broken spirit. But it shattered the instant they reached Lily's room. Buddy's body went rigid, his muscles tensing as his eyes locked onto the glass wall, separating him from the tiny infant lying in the incubator. His breath hitched, his tail falling still as his gaze grew wide and distant. Sarah's heart sank at the change in him, her hand tightening on his fur. Buddy, she whispered, worry knotting her stomach. What is it? Buddy didn't respond. He was frozen, his eyes fixed on Lily's fragile form, his body trembling as if an invisible force was holding him in place. His ears flattened, his head lowering as a soft whimper escaped his throat. Sarah's chest tightened, panic flickering through her mind. Was he scared? Did he not recognize her? But as she watched him, the truth became painfully clear. Buddy wasn't afraid. He was remembering. His eyes were distant, his body rigid with grief as memories pulled him back to a place Sarah couldn't see, a place where pain and loss had stolen his hope. Oh, Buddy, she whispered, sinking to her knees beside him, her arms wrapped around his shaking body, holding him close as his head fell against her shoulder, his eyes closing as a broken whine slipped from his lips. Sarah's heart shattered at the sound, tears filling her eyes as she cradled him. I'm so sorry, she choked out, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I didn't know you were hurting like this. Buddy's body sagged against hers, his legs giving out as he collapsed into her embrace. His breath was ragged, his body trembling with silent sobs as he buried his face in her shoulder, seeking comfort in her warmth. Sarah held him tightly, her fingers stroking his fur as tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't try to quiet his pain. She just held him, letting him grieve in her arms. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in a cocoon of shared sorrow. Nurses passed by with sympathetic looks, giving them space to grieve. Sarah didn't care who saw her crying. All she cared about was the broken soul in her arms. The hero who had saved Lily, only to be haunted by the memories of the life he had lost. She didn't know what he had seen, what he had suffered, but she could feel the depth of his pain in every shuddering breath, every heart-wrenching whimper. And she made a silent promise to him right there, a vow that burned fiercely in her heart. I'm going to help you, she whispered, her voice trembling with determination. I don't know how, but I'll find a way. I won't let you suffer alone. Buddy's body stilled at her words, his head lifting as he looked at her through tear-filled eyes. There was a question in his gaze, a flicker of hope struggling to survive beneath the shadows of his past. Sarah's heart ached as she met his eyes, her fingers brushing the fur on his cheek. You're not alone anymore, Buddy. I'm right here, and I'm not leaving you. Buddy's eyes softened, his body leaning into her touch as his trembling eased. He let out a shuddering breath, his head resting against her shoulder as his eyes closed. This time his body was relaxed, his weight a warm, comforting presence against her chest. Sarah held him close, her tears falling silently as she rocked him gently, whispering words of love and safety. It was Jenna who finally broke the silence, her voice soft and cautious. Sarah, you should bring him in. Sarah looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Bring him in where? Jenna's gaze flicked to Lily's room, her expression tender. To see her. I think he needs to see that she's okay. Sarah's heart skipped at the suggestion, her eyes widening as she looked down at Buddy. His body was limp with exhaustion, his breathing soft and steady as he rested in her arms. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, strong and steady, a rhythm of life that echoed her own. "You're right," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He needs to see her." With gentle care, Sarah rose to her feet, lifting Buddy into her arms as his head rested against her shoulder. He didn't protest, his body trusting her to carry him. Jenna opened the door to Lily's room, her eyes shining with tears as she stepped aside. "Take your time," she whispered, her voice cracking. Sarah nodded, her gratitude too deep for words. She stepped into the room, the soft beeping of monitors filling the air. The room was warm, the sunlight streaming through the window casting a golden glow over Lily's tiny form. She looked peaceful, her face relaxed as she slept, her chest rising and falling with delicate breaths. Buddy's head lifted at the sight, his eyes softening as he stared at her. His body grew still, his gaze tender as he watched the baby he had saved. Sarah held him close, her heart aching at the love she saw in his eyes. "She's safe," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Because of you, Buddy. She's alive because you saved her." Buddy let out a soft huff, his eyes glistening with tears as he watched Lily sleep. His body relaxed, his head resting against Sarah's shoulder as his eyes closed. For the first time since she had found him, Buddy was at peace. And as Sarah stood there, cradling the hero who had saved her heart as much as he had saved Lily's life, she knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. Weeks passed, and the whispers of Buddy's heroism continued to echo through Seattle Grace Medical Center. Lily grew stronger with each day, her frail body gaining weight, her cheeks filling with a rosy hue. The doctors called it a miracle, but Sarah knew the truth. It was Buddy's courage and love that had saved her. Buddy rarely left Sarah's side, his loyalty unwavering. He slept by Lily's crib, his golden eyes watching over her protectively, his ears twitching at every sound. The staff grew accustomed to his presence, their initial hesitance melting into adoration. Nurses would sneak him treats, doctors would pause to scratch behind his ears, and patients would smile at the sight of him trotting beside Sarah with his tail wagging. He became a symbol of hope, a guardian angel who had defied the odds to save a life. But the mystery of Lily's abandonment lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. Detective Mason kept his promise, returning to the hospital with updates, each visit bringing more questions than answers. "We traced the woman on the security footage," he explained one afternoon, his voice low and serious. "She matches the description of Clara Evans, a local artist who disappeared 3 months ago." Sarah's heart skipped, her fingers tightening on Buddy's fur. "Disappeared? How?" Mason's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Lily sleeping peacefully in the crib. "She was evicted from her apartment. No job, no family. No one even realized she was gone. We think she had the baby on her own and couldn't find a way to take care of her." His voice softened, his shoulders sagging beneath the weight of his words. "We've searched the shelters, the streets, but she's vanished without a trace." Sarah's chest tightened, her gaze drifting to Buddy. "She was alone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just like you were." Buddy's eyes met hers, his amber gaze filled with understanding. He let out a soft whine, his head lowering as his body pressed against her leg. Sarah sank to her knees, her arms wrapping around him as tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Buddy. I'm sorry she left you too." Buddy nuzzled her shoulder, his tongue brushing against her cheek as if to comfort her. But his eyes were sad, his body tense with a grief he didn't know how to release. Sarah's heart broke at the sight, her own pain mixing with his. "We'll find her," she vowed, her voice fierce with determination. "We'll find Clara, and we'll bring her home." The search continued, days bleeding into nights as Sarah and Mason followed every lead, chased every whisper. Buddy was with them at every step, his nose pressed to the ground, his body tense with anticipation. He led them through alleys and parks, to abandoned buildings and hidden shelters, his instincts guiding him with unwavering resolve. But each time they came up empty-handed, Clara's trail fading into nothingness. Hope began to waver, fatigue pulling at Sarah's heart. But she refused to give up. She owed it to Buddy, to Lily, and to Clara. It was on a rainy afternoon, nearly a month after Lily's rescue, that Buddy finally found her. They were walking through Pinecrest Park, the ground damp beneath their feet, the trees swaying beneath the weight of the wind. Buddy's body went rigid, his nose twitching as his ears perked. His tail shot up, his muscles coiling as he took off like a bolt of lightning, his paws pounding against the muddy earth. "Buddy!" Sarah shouted, her heart racing as she chased after him, her shoes slipping in the wet grass. She followed him through the trees, branches scratching at her arms as rain soaked her hair. "Buddy, wait!" But Buddy didn't stop. He ran faster, his body moving with purpose, his eyes locked on something ahead. And then Sarah saw her. A woman was huddled beneath a broken pavilion, her body curled against the wall as rain poured around her. Her clothes were ragged, her hair tangled and wet, her face hidden behind a curtain of matted curls. But it was her eyes that stole Sarah's breath, dark and hollow, filled with pain and despair. Buddy skidded to a stop, his body trembling as he stood before her, his tail wagging slowly as he let out a soft whine. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of him. Her lips parted, a gasp escaping as tears filled her eyes. "Buddy?" Her voice was cracked and broken, but the love in her tone was unmistakable. Is it really you?" Buddy whimpered, his body collapsing at her feet as his head pressed against her knees. The woman sobbed, her arms wrapping around him as she buried her face in his fur, her shoulders shaking with grief and relief. "Oh, Buddy, I thought I lost you. I thought—" Her words dissolved into sobs, her fingers clutching his fur as if afraid he would disappear. Sarah's heart shattered at the sight, tears streaming down her face as she watched them. She took a step forward, her voice soft and gentle. "Clara?" The woman's head lifted, her eyes locking onto Sarah's face. Recognition flickered in her gaze, her body tensing as she pulled Buddy closer. "Who are you?" she whispered, fear lacing her words. Sarah sank to her knees, her hands open and empty. "My name is Sarah. I'm a nurse at Seattle Grace. I'm taking care of Lily." Clara's body went still, her eyes widening with shock. "Lily?" Her voice was barely a breath, her face crumpling as fresh tears poured down her cheeks. "My baby, is she alive?" Sarah's heart ached, her own tears falling as she nodded. "Yes, she's alive, Clara. She's beautiful, and she's waiting for you." Clara's body shook with sobs, her hands flying to her mouth as she cried, her eyes filled with disbelief and hope. I didn't know what to do," she choked out, her voice breaking. I thought she'd be better off without me. I thought I'd lost everything." Sarah moved closer, her hand resting on Clara's shoulder. "You didn't lose her," she whispered. "Buddy found her. He saved her, and he saved you too." Clara looked down at Buddy, her eyes overflowing with love and gratitude. "You brought her back to me," she sobbed, her arms wrapping around him as she kissed his head. "You brought me back to life." Buddy's tail wagged, his eyes closing as he pressed against her, his body trembling with relief. Together they walked back to Seattle Grace, Buddy trotting between them as Clara leaned on Sarah for support. When they reached Lily's room, Clara fell to her knees, her hands shaking as she touched her daughter's face for the first time in months. "My baby," she whispered, her tears falling onto Lily's soft cheeks. "My beautiful baby." Buddy curled up beside them, his eyes warm and gentle as he watched the family he had saved. Sarah stood by the door, her heart full as she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Buddy looked up at her, his amber eyes shining with love. And in that moment, Sarah knew she had found more than just a stray dog. She had found hope. She had found family. And they were home. This heartwarming story reminds us of the incredible power of love, courage, and second chances. Buddy showed us that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, even with 4 paws and a wagging tail. His unwavering loyalty and bravery saved a life, proving that compassion knows no boundaries. Through his journey, we learned about hope, healing, and the importance of never giving up on those we care about. Clara's redemption and Lily's survival remind us that even in our darkest moments, love can bring us back to the light. This story isn't just about a rescue, it's about the bonds that connect us, the strength to face our past, and the courage to embrace new beginnings. If this tale touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of hope and inspiration. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more incredible stories with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the message of love and kindness. See you next time.